Welcome to Unforbidden Truth. I'm Andrew. This is part 2 of my interview with Quincy Cross, John Poole, Noble Faulkner, and Joe Currin. The views and opinions expressed in this interview by those interviewed are solely their own and does not reflect the views and opinions of Unforbidden Truth or its staff. So Noble, tell me a little bit about yourself, when and why you became an investigator, and what drew you to Quincy's case to want to advocate for him.
Well, I got involved in. I'm a former investigator with the Columbus in Columbus, Ohio, with the Franklin County Public Defender's Office. Before that, I was an investigator with the Paducah Public Defender's Office in Paducah, Kentucky. I got involved into the case by one of the defendant's mother, Miss Brenda Jackson. She came to me and asked me, was I still doing investigative work? Was I in business? I said, yes. She told me what was going on. She asked me, would I please look into the case? Well, mind you that when she came to me to ask me to get into this case was already 10 years old. She introduced me to Mr. John Poole, and he gave me some background information on the case, and I looked through it, and once I looked through what he had given me, I stated, I was like, well, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. This can't possibly be true. This couldn't have possibly happened, not the way that they've got it stated here. So after a while of been looking into this case, the people that were involved in the case, and I'm like, well, the way that they had it set up with Jeremy Adams and Lolo Saxon and Tamara Caldwell and Quincy and Jeffrey, and I'm like, wait a minute, none of this is adding up. Now, when I went into the case and I first started looking into it, there was a whole bunch of other stuff about these other people were doing this, and so there was a motorcycle gang supposed to have been involved in it. And after looking into it, and I said, wait a minute, none of this has anything to do with the case. We need to find out who did what to who, when, where, and why. So after looking into that, I found out that the key players in this case, Jeremy Adams and Lolo Saxon, the two people who were first originally indicted in the case, certain information came about where that they were exonerated from the case with prejudice due to the fact that the prosecuting attorney had actually lost some evidence from the case. When we looked into it, and I went to Mr. Hargrove at one point, and I had questioned him about the case, and I asked him about the evidence that was allegedly supposed to be turned over to the defense that was supposed to be given to the defense through the proper court time. He, knowing that him being a prosecuting attorney, that information should have been handed over. After investigating the case, I found out that Mr. Hargrove's son and Mr. Adams had been doing some illegal drug business together, and Mr. Hargrove knew it. Well, after a while, I looked at the further digging into the case. It said where Quincy Cross was involved. After looking into it, I found out that, according to the police investigation, that according to Sergeant Steger, he had arrested Quincy Omar Cross on July the 30th at 11:47 a.m. in the morning. According to the same officer, Sergeant Steger, who is a state police officer for the Kentucky State Police, in his testimony in the grand jury stated that for the timeline, let's get the timeline straight. And they asked, when was she found? Well, he stated that she was found on August the 1st, on September 1st. I said, okay, did you find out what time she was killed and transported to the middle school? He stated that it would have been the day before she was found. Well, if that's the case, then the day before she was found would have been July the 31st. So I couldn't understand why, if they transported her on July the 31st and they found her on the 1st, Quincy Cross was arrested on the 30th. And according to the records of the police department and the Graves County Jail, it states that Quincy Cross was arrested on July the 30th. Well, if he was arrested on July the 30th, and according to his lockup sheet, he spent 187 consecutive days in jail from the day that he was arrested, then there was no way in the world that he could have been behind Mayfield Middle School on July the 31st, killing Jessica Currin, because he was already in jail. Now, it doesn't take a brain science to understand that there's a discrepancy there. Now, when we get down to the witnesses, according to Victoria Caldwell, she stated that she was there, she helped participate in the murder. Well, her account was that they went to this house out on Chris Drive, and that they packed this girl into the house and laid her on this bedroom, and they did all of these things to her. Well, the problem with that is that at this house, at Austin Leach's house, is that after interrogating Austin Leach and getting the rest of the evidence from there, it was Austin Leach, his old lady, Travis Jackson, his old lady, and another gentleman. They were all there. They all stated that they were there that night having a party doing drugs. Now, my whole thing was that how did Quincy Cross, Tamara Caldwell, Victoria Caldwell, Vinisha Stubblefield, Jeffrey Burton take this girl to somebody else's house that they didn't live in, take her to a bedroom, have sexual relations with this girl, and kill her? But they're in someone else's house, and the other person in the house didn't know anything about it. When we come back and I investigated further, I found out that Quincy Cross could have possibly done it. Now, Jeremy Adams, we've got witnesses from the BP station where he was at, where the lady said it was Jeremy Adams who came in and bought the gasoline, and that Vinisha Stubblefield was there, Victoria Caldwell was there, and Lolo Saxon was there. And they stood in front of her register, they had a conversation, and they all left together from the BP station. Now, when you go into that and you look at what was the statement that was given to the KBI, and the gentleman that was doing the interview at the time was Mr. Sutherland, he asked Victoria Caldwell, where did you all go after you left Chris Drive? She stated that they went to the BP station. He said, okay, but where did you go after you left the BP station? She said, we went around the corner, we went up to the stop sign, we made a right, went down to the next stop sign, made another right, we came down on the side of the school where the steps were, and that's where we ran into Jessica. Now, earlier in her statement, she said that they took this girl to 597 Chris Drive. Well, according to the owners of that house and the people who resided at that house, they never came there. When the KBI examined Victoria Caldwell and asked her, how did you get there? She didn't know. Well, after I got hold to Vinisha Stubblefield, And I asked Vinisha Stubblefield when I had her under question. She stated to me that they rode out to 597 Chris Drive and that her and Jessica sat in the car and had a conversation while Quincy and Tamara allegedly went into the house. Then they got out of the car and walked in the house. Now, according to the state's key witness, Victoria Caldwell, she stated that Quincy Cross pulled a bag from under the seat and hit Jessica in the head, and they packed her into the house, which we don't understand how that happened. Now, it doesn't take a brain science to understand that, hey, there's some conflicting stories here. So I asked Vinisha, I said, why is it that whenever you went to court and Victoria went to court, you all were talking about the same murder, excuse me, but nothing ever matched? Vinisha stated on tape that they coached Victoria, they didn't coach her. I said, what you mean? She said, well, they told her what to say. They didn't tell me what to say. So when I get back and I go to Victoria Caldwell and come to find out that she had went to California, and that by the time the KBI came in on this case, allegedly a woman by the name of Susan Galbraith allegedly said that she found Victoria out in California and that she had mentioned her to the KBI. Well, there was other people who already knew that Victoria was in California 6 months after the KBI had already been in on this case. So it wasn't no big deal about where she was at. So the KBI gets a hold of Victoria and they talk to her, and eventually they go out there, they get her, they bring her back. Well, according to Victoria, on September the 7th of 2000, she stated that, and gave a statement to the Mayfield Police Department that she overheard Jeremy Adams and Lolo Saxon plotting to kill Jessica Currin because she had lied. Okay, she said, and the reason why she knew that is because she had overheard them talking in the kitchen and that they had wrote it down on a piece of paper and they had left the kitchen, so she went in there and she read it on the paper. So that's how come she knew that it was them. Now, after she went to California and been gone for a period of time, over a 5-year period of time, the Kentucky State Police asked the California Police Office Department to go and get a statement from her. And this is 5 years later. Now, in that statement that Officer Howard took from her, she stated that, again, she gave the same statement 5 years later that it was Lolo Saxon and Jeremy Adams who plotted to kill Jessica Currin. Now, you got to understand that from 2000 all the way to 2006, Quincy Cross, Jeffrey Burton, nor Tamara Caldwell's name were ever even mentioned in this case. All of this time. Well, they go out there and get her and bring her back, the KBI does. Now, once they get her back to Kentucky, now it's no longer Jeremy Adams and Lolo Saxon. Now it's Tamara Caldwell, Jeffrey Burton, and Quincy Cross that did it. Now, something is wrong here, and it doesn't, you have to be the sharpest tool in the shed to understand that there's two conflicting stories here. 5 years ago, you stated that it was these two people. Now, 5 years later, you said it was these three people. So there's your conflicting story. When you get down into the case and you look at it, the state never proved who killed this girl, because you can't say that you had a witness a creditable witness in the case to say that, well, I saw them do this. Because all the witnesses that they had in the case, they admitted that they had lied. And they all recanted this, and they recanted their stories. Now, furthermore, when you look at the case, Victoria Caldwell now states that she helped them wrap this girl up into a blanket and put her into a garage. Well, at this particular time, during that particular time of the year, after I checked back and checked the weather report for that particular day, that whole particular week, there's no way in the world that you could have left this girl in the garage wrapped in a blanket for 2 days and then came back and moved her body to the Mayfield Middle School, because the average night temperature at 12 o'clock at night was 85 degrees. And the average day temperature during that particular year was running anywhere from 102 to 105 degrees, with the heat index up to 107 to 109 degrees. Now, if you leave a body in a garage that long, everybody in the neighborhood is going to know there's something rotten there. So there's no way that they could have picked her up from there, took her to the Mayfield Middle School, and killed her there. According to Victoria's statement, where they had ran into her on the side of the steps where the school was, that's where Vinisha Stubblefield, the other state's key witness, stated that she said, let her out of the car. She didn't want to have anything to do with it. Now, after I interrogated her and questioned her, I asked her, I said, are you sure that this is true? She said, yes, it is. So I said, Vinisha, there's no way that could be true. I said, because the statement that you're giving was already given 5 years prior to that. And I said, there's no way that the KBI told you to give that story. She said, yes, they did. This is what they told me to say. I said, no, there's no way they could do that, because how can they tell you and give this statement when they wasn't even on the case until 6 years afterwards? I said, now, you need to rethink the story. So she did. Then afterwards, I told her, I said, well, look, these stories that you all are giving now, it's not going to work. You're going to have to come up with the truth. So then that's when she broke down crying and said, well, she gave her name and said, this is what happened. She said, Lolo, you're my cousin. I love you to the moon and back. But how can you sit here and accuse me of a murder that you know that you did? She said, Nikki Brown, Victoria, you all know what y'all did to that girl. Now, why did she say that? She said that for the simple reason of this. She was there. And the reason why we can prove that she was there, because the lady at the BP station put all of them together across the street from the Mayfield Middle School that night. And it was after 12 o'clock, because you got to remember that particular night on July the 31st, Quincy Cross was already in jail. He was arrested the day before. So there's no way in the world that he could have done it. And then after further investigation, I found out that Quincy Cross never met Tamara Caldwell until 2 years after Jessica Currin was killed. So it's hard for me to believe the state's key witnesses when they said that Tamara and Quincy and all of them were in a car and took this girl to Chris Drive and they sexually molested her and killed her, when this man didn't even know Tamara Caldwell until 2 years after she had died. And the reason why they had met was because Quincy was serving time for driving without a driver's license with a gun enhancement and marijuana. Okay? He was at the RC Center in Mayfield when he met Tamara Caldwell. The reason why he met her was because a guy by the name of, they call him Papa, which was Tamara's brother, came to visit him at the RC Center, and that's when Quincy seen her and got acquainted with her through her brother. So there's no way in the world that Tamara Caldwell and Quincy Cross was in a car with Jessica Currin in the car with Vinisha, Victoria, and all of them, when the man didn't even meet this woman until 2 years after she had died. It doesn't match. The state doesn't have any hair. They don't have any semen, urine, skin, hair, nothing. No DNA evidence whatsoever to prove that these three people here committed this murder. They don't even have enough evidence to even put them at the crime scene, let alone them committing the murder. The whole thing is a big sham, and it all came down to where that there was officials in the Mayfield Police Department, such as the Assistant Chief of Police, the prosecuting attorney. They were having sex and drug parties with young 13, 14, 15, and 16-year-old girls. Now, according to another state's key witness, Nikki Brown, she stated to the KBI that she was having sexual relationships with the Assistant Chief of Police, Ronnie Lear. At the time, she wasn't 16 years old. She also stated that he was having sex with Victoria Caldwell. Okay, now, the other thing is, yes, that they knew this. They knew this. And then the KBI turned around and got Vinisha Stubblefield, and they threatened her and told her that if she didn't do what they said do, then they was going to make sure that her mother went to jail, and that she went to jail because they had found a crack pipe in her mother's purse. Okay? Now, you got to understand something. All of these kids that are involved in this case, you might say, yeah, they were poor kids. They lived on the backside of the tracks. All of them were in special ed. So what more perfect person to frame than these kids? They're at the point of they were at the point where that, hey, these guys are the police. They know what they're talking about. And if we don't do what they do, then they got the authority to do this to us. So they scared these people into doing what it was that they wanted them to do. If you go through the tapes that the KBI did with Vinisha, especially with Vinisha Stubblefield, Vinisha Stubblefield stated that they coached her into saying what they wanted her to say. And when she didn't say it the way that they wanted her to say it, they would turn off the camera and instruct her on what to say. Well, I found that kind of hard to believe, but being a law enforcement agency until I found out for myself. Because I turned my volume up, and every time that they would ask her a question, she would hesitate in answering the question, but then she would break through and answer the question. But then I found out that you could hear somebody in the background turning pages. And every time they turn a page, they would ask her a question. She would hesitate in answering, then she would answer. After she would answer, you could hear them turning another page. So I asked Vinisha, I said, Vinisha, is there any time in this case that the KBI prepared statements for you to give in this case that was not true? She answered yes. And she also stated that the Assistant Attorney General, prosecuting attorney, Barbara Whaley, also had her to give statements in the case that was not true. To me, and I've investigated other homicides before, and this is one of the worst homicides that anyone could probably investigate. This is a whole bunch of cover up. There's a bunch of lying. But the thing of it is, you got to understand, is that the people who are involved in this case have power and positions. When you start talking about prosecuting attorneys, you talked about assistant chief of police and police officers, people who are in position. These people can do things to you. So therefore, they have the power to manipulate. When you look at it, the whole case is a cover-up. The whole case, the thing got covered up when they tried to cover up the fact that the Mayfield Police Department was having sex and drug parties with underage girls. One of those girls, which was Jessica Currin, came up dead. Due to the fact that it was such a horrific crime, and after 5 years, Mr. Currin couldn't get any satisfaction in this case, and they had let Lolo Saxon and Jeremy Adams go, Mr. Currin went to Grant Stumbo, and he asked Stumbo for help. Stumbo said that he would send his own police force down to investigate and solve the crime. Well, this is when he sent Lee Wise and Robert O'Neill down, and they came down and they intimidated people, paid people for statements, and all of this other stuff. That was the pressure was put on them by Greg Stumbo, who at the time was the lieutenant, he was running for lieutenant governor. He figured that if he could get this crime solved, due to the fact that it was so horrific, that he could get the confidence of the people in the Western Kentucky and get their votes to be elected for lieutenant governor. That's what it's about. It's all about power and manipulation. Now, when you go back to the case and you figure where that the police officer, Mr. Ronnie Lear, goes to Jessica Currin's apartment, and he has a drug dog at her apartment. Well, she wasn't killed at her apartment. She was killed across town. But he did that for the simple reason of this. See, Jeremy Adams and Lolo Saxon were selling drugs for them. Mr. Lear had to get into that apartment to find those drugs. That's when he went to the apartment manager and told the apartment manager that they wanted to train a drug dog. Now, out of all the apartments that they have in that apartment, why did it have to be Jessica Currin's apartment? The fact of it is that Lolo Saxon and Jeremy Adams had drugs that they had left at Jessica Currin's apartment. That's why Jeremy Adams was caught trying to break into Jessica's apartment and got ran off. When he got ran off, Ronnie Lear knew that he had to get into that apartment to get those drugs. And that's one of the biggest bases of the case right there, is how he got involved and why him and Mr. Hargrove was involved. Because according to Vinisha Stubblefield, she stated on video and audio that Ronnie Lear and a prosecuting attorney Hargrove were the main two people who gathered up all the young girls and took them to the country club. She also stated that they paid them money, they fed them food, and they had sexual relationships with these people at the country club. There's another lady by the name of Miss Langston, who her daughter was one of the people that they were having sex with. Miss Langston, I ran up on her by accident because one day me and another guy was discussing the case, and she happened to ride up. I didn't know her, she didn't know me. And she asked me, she said, "Mister, what are they going to do about the men that were having sex with the young girls?" I told her, I said, "Ma'am, right now, that's just an allegation. There's no hard evidence to prove that they were having sex with young girls." The lady looked at me and said, "Allegation, my ass, that's no allegation." I said, "Ma'am," she said, "that's no allegation because my daughter was one of the girls who was having sex with Hargrove and Ronnie Lear." So I asked her for an interview, and she gave me one. And in her interview, she stated that she found out that her daughter was going to the country club having sex with a prosecuting attorney, Hargrove, and also Assistant Police Chief Ronnie Lear. And that when she found out about it, she stopped her child from going around Vinisha Stubblefield because they came to her house to get her daughter to go with them. She said, well, her daughter was grounded, she wasn't going anywhere. Well, lo and behold, one of the judges at that time, Royce Buck, found out that Miss Langston had grounded her daughter and she no longer could come, and he had that lady arrested and brought up on charges for mental cruelty, said that she kept her child in the house too much. Well, I couldn't believe that. Well, she said, well, you have my permission to go to the courthouse and pull my records. Well, it's true. This man emancipated this girl from her mother and told her mother to take her other two kids and leave town. And he still carried on a relationship with this going girl, Miss Langston's 13-year-old daughter. And she said at the time this was going on, her daughter wasn't but 13 years old. Now you got to understand that according to the other state's key witness, Nikki Brown stated to the KBI that yes, they were having sexual relationships with young girls. And even at that time, Victoria Caldwell wasn't but 14 years old herself. So when you look at it, the whole case is a cover-up for wrongdoing that was being done within the city. And then when the KBI got involved in it, it was a whole big cover-up because the Attorney General wanted votes to win an election. So what they did, they orchestrated this story, and what they did, they ended up getting Victoria Caldwell to change her whole complete statement. Because you got to remember, on September the 7th of 2000, Victoria Caldwell gave a statement stating that it was Jeremy Adams and Lolo Saxon who she overheard plot to kill Jessica Currin. Now, 5 years later, after the San Marino, California police, state police, go and investigate her and interview her in California, now you got to understand that 5 years later, she gave more intricate details about this murder 5 years later than she did previously. Then when they get back to the state of Kentucky, it was no longer Lolo Saxon and Jeremy Adams. Now it was Quincy Cross, Tamara Caldwell, and Jeffrey Burton that did it. Now, I know I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I'm not the dullest either. Now, there's two conflicting stories there. Either it was the first or either it was the second. And either way it goes, Victoria Caldwell was never jailed for the statements that she gave. And when you look at the case, you can prove that she lied all the way through this case.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the evidence in the case that not only put Jeffrey Burton in prison, but Quincy Cross in prison, is the statements that were given that were recanted, right? Is there any other evidence that was logged or presented in court?
No.
So the evidence that
The
no
case
longer
does.
exists is what is keeping Quincy Cross in prison?
Well, they never tested a hair that was found on the shoe there. The defense made a motion to get it tested for DNA, and the judge denied it. Pretty much, if you look at the record, anytime they brought up something that would bring maybe some truth to the case, and Judge Stark was new then, he turned it down.
What was the basis of
So,
denying testing the DNA, the only DNA in the case that they had? What was the basis?
I guess the time the attorney got to it, it would have delayed the start of the trial. In fact, if you look at that trial, it was super fast. I've done other trials. In fact, I did the Murray State arson murder. In fact, he was acquitted. You can look that up. No, just Google it. But that was another one that drug on for years. And they really messed that case up too. That was the state police, and Steger again was involved in that. And then Steger goes on and becomes elected Callaway County Sheriff, and then he up and quits to go into farming. So I don't know what went on over there in that.
Have any of you, Joe, Noble, or John, had any interactions with Jeremy Adams or Carlos Saxton since Quincy and Jeff's arrest and convictions?
Yeah, I have both of them. Yeah, I got a chance to one time. Lolo Saxon had a friend that lived across the street from me, and I knew Lolo Saxon's baby's mother, and she was a friend to Miss Brenda Jackson. But his friend who lived across the street, every time Lolo would call him, he would send for me and tell me to come over. He said, I got Lolo on the phone, just be quiet and just listen. Well, he questioned Lolo several times about the murder and what was going on. And he said, I remember one statement, he said, well, do you think you might want to talk to Mr. Faulkner and see what he says? He said, no, I don't want to talk to him. He said, I don't want him to know no more than what he already knows. So when he found out that I had interrogated his cousin, which is Vinisha Stubblefield, and she stated on video that it was him who killed Jessica Currin. Then he called back to talk to his friends, and I was listening on, and he was trying to find Vinisha to find out what all she had told me. Well, he came to Mayfield, and when things got hot, every time he'd come to Mayfield, I knew he was there because his child's mother would call me up and say, Mr. Faulkner, hey, Lolo's in town. This is where he's at. So I've always had an eye on him. Now, just this past couple of years, Jeremy Adams, he hauled me off up on the Steve Wilkos show. And to prove his innocence. Now, you got to understand that Jeremy Adams wasn't saying too much of anything about this case until Mr. Hargrove, the prosecuting attorney, got indicted on some other charges, unrelated charges to this case. Now, when that happened, he started coming out of the woodwork saying, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. It wasn't me. I didn't do it. Well, all of a sudden, you want to drag people on Steve Wilkos' show, which was me, to prove that you didn't do it. Well, after his scenario that he gives them, they only ask him one question, and it came back when he told the truth. Well, hell, he had 17 years to practice on it. But the lie detector test that the state police gave him, the Commonwealth of Kentucky gave him, he showed deception in it. He flunked it. You see? So the whole thing came down to when he had said that he had told Mrs. Currin when he ran into her at the mall. Miss Currin, I didn't kill your daughter, but I know who did. He also wrote them a letter stating that he didn't do it, but he know who did. But here it is, 20 years later, you still haven't told the Currins, law enforcement, or anyone else who did it. Now, according to the Kentucky Revised Statute in this state, if you know of a crime that's being committed or about to be committed, and you don't try to stop it, or you don't inform the person that is being committed against about the crime, or either that if you don't contact the authorities, then that makes you an accessory to that crime, which in this case was capital murder. It was a murder case. So by his own admission, he puts himself into the case. By witnesses such as the BP station, the two waitresses, Miss Langston and the other waitress who was at the Coffee Cup restaurant, who stated the night that Jessica was killed, that they came in there smelling and reeking of gas, and they got into a big argument because they wanted them to leave because they was irritating the customers with the smell of gasoline that was all in their clothes. See, it doesn't make any sense because Quincy, this car that Quincy allegedly had, he stated that he went and stole some gas and had it in a gas can. Now, a deputy jailer came up on Quincy as he was putting gas into this car and seeing Quincy when he spilled the gas on him. He gave Quincy a ride to 597 Chris Drive. Now, it's unconceivable for me to think that I'm going to steal gasoline and it's in a gas can, but I'm going to pour the gasoline out of the gas can into a bottle to go put it into a car when I could just take the whole gas can and go put it into the car. See, you get stories like that. When you go to the crime scene and they say, well, the victim, she was naked. Well, when you look at the crime scene photos, it's plain to see that she was clothed. Conflicting stories like that, you know. And then when you get down to the crime scene, and I asked Mr. Hargrove, I said, Mr. Hargrove, what happened to the evidence that came up missing from the crime scene? He stated to me that there was no evidence missing. I said, yes, sir, it was. He said, no, it wasn't. So I pulled out a piece of paper and showed it to him. I said, this, there's 11 pieces of evidence that never even made it to the lockup room. Why not? He said, it didn't come up missing. He said, I had that evidence in a box sitting on my desk in my office to go to trial with the next day. He said that when I came in the office the next morning, that box was gone. I said, well, Mr. Hargrove, I want to ask you a question. Why was the evidence from a capital murder case sitting in your office where God knows who, the janitor and everybody else has got a key to get into your office? Why was it in your office when it should have been in the evidence room locked up? He couldn't answer that. I said, well, let me ask you another question. You stated that Quincy Cross was a drug dealer. And I noticed on his sheet here, he's in charge with 5 counts of drug trafficking. I want you to explain to me, Mr. Hargrove, how did this man get 5 counts of drug trafficking on his record when he was locked up on July the 30th? He didn't get out until 180 days later. But from July the 30th, he's got 5 drug trafficking charges on his sheet. And one of them is in October, one in November, one in December, and one in January. How did he get these charges when he was locked up in jail. Because according to the jailer and the judge, he spent 187 consecutive days in jail from the day that he was arrested. Now, in between those months, you got in charge with 5 counts of drug trafficking. What were you doing? Let the boy sell drugs in jail? I said, there's no way in the world that these charges are true. So a police officer told me, he said, well, sometimes we'll house them somewhere else and then we'll bring them back and we'll charge them. I said, no, I understand what you're saying, but you have to charge them from the time that the crime was committed. Not when you bring them over here, well, we're going to charge you today, but the crime was committed last month, but we're going to charge you for it today. You can't do that. You can't do that. So how did this young man get all of these drug charges on top of this capital murder case? Well, Mr. Hargrove, I want to know one thing else. Did this information go to the grand jury with him to make it look like he was a worse person than what has already had been stated? He couldn't answer that. He couldn't answer it. I said, well, the evidence speaks for itself. It speaks for itself, Mr. Hargrove. You got this man charged with 5 drug charges and he was locked up in jail. And you can't tell me why he got these charges. I said, you know, and I know that these charges that you got on this sheet of paper is bogus. He couldn't say a word. He couldn't say a word. But after our interview, he stated that if you'll go and bring me more evidence, I'll be more than happy to reopen the case and re-prosecute it. Well, I'm pretty sure you would. Doing now, considering that you're being implicated in having sex with these young girls, and one of the girls is dead. So those are a lot of the facts right there that shows and tells that the state of Kentucky, the Commonwealth of Kentucky, had no evidence, no witnesses to prove that Quincy Cross, Jeffrey Burton, or Tamara Caldwell killed Jessica Currin. They don't. They don't have it. And I thought in this country, we were charged and convicted on evidence that we can prove. There's no way that you can prove this. You don't have enough evidence to even indict them, let alone convict them and send them to prison. Now, if it's a lie, their records is the one that told it, because the evidence that I got was from the case that they used to convict these people and send them to prison with. And don't none of it, Mr. Dodge, add up. None of this stuff adds up, sir. And that's true. That is true.
So, Joe, I want to start out with having you talk about yourself, your family, and most importantly, your daughter, whose life was tragically cut short, followed by so many twists and turns that you've had to deal with. Let's start off with talking about your daughter. Tell me what kind of person she was, how your relationship was with her, and anything you would like the people to know about her.
Well, I mean, she was very outgoing, very intelligent, loved being around her family on the holidays and helped cooking and planning things. And she was a very important part of our family. We met a lot. She was like a phone book. You could just name a place and she would know the phone number, remember all of that. She had like a photographic memory. Once she sees something, she could tell you what the phone number was, where it's at, what it looks like. She could walk into a room and leave, and then she could tell you what everybody had on, what color they wore. I mean, everything. And her and my wife was best friends.
Were you two close?
Yes, we were close. Me and her was about the only one that would watch scary movies together. Nobody else would watch them, but she'd watch them with me. And we'd watch the X-Files and stuff like that, kind of mystery stuff. And nobody else would watch that kind of stuff with us.
So, Joe, when you first got word about the news, what was that like? Where was your mind at the time?
It all started where about Zion, and she had the paternity test, and the boy she thought it was didn't come up, and she decided she wanted to move out. So I helped her move out, and she had been out about 2 weeks. She stayed at home with us the first week, and actually most of the next week she had went to her apartment in Mayfield, the Plaza Apartments, about 3 days before it happened. And I had went by on Saturday, pick up Zion to go to church with me and my wife. And she told us to check with her on Sunday morning, and she would probably go to church with us. And we went by that Sunday morning. She didn't answer the phone, so I answered the door. And so we just went on to church, and then after church we came back. So I had Zion with me. That was her first Saturday that she stayed at the apartment overnight, and that's when it happened. So she hadn't been there more than 2 or 3 days. And that first Saturday night after she moved out was when it happened. So we just went looking for her, and I was telling my wife we had to wait so many hours to call in a missing person. I had retired from the fire department at Mayfield, captain, and I'd worked at the sheriff's department, so I kind of knew a little bit about that kind of stuff. So we was kind of waiting, and in the meantime, we heard about a body that they found behind the middle school. Of course, when we heard about it, what we heard was that it was a male. It was a boy. And so it kind of worried us because we couldn't get a hold of her. We called some of her friends and talked to everybody that we could, and we couldn't find out anything. So we went to the police department, and then that's when we found out.
You found out right at the police department?
Yes. We had drove by the middle school and saw stuff going on over there, but we had no clue it was her. Because we had heard about a person, but we thought it was a male. So we didn't think it was her. So we went to the police department to report it, and that's when we found out.
What was that moment like when you had found out?
First, it was disbelief. I didn't want to believe it. They talked about like the condition she was in. They weren't sure. So I kept the hope that maybe it wasn't her. And so that went on a few days, and then they kind of, after they got the dental records and all of that, it was positively identified that it was her. Of course, me still being kind of in disbelief, me and my wife both, but we kind of hold on to the hope that it may be, it wasn't her. And but when we found out that it was her, I'll be honest with you, I can't tell you where I went, who I talked to, or nothing for the next 3 months. I was just kind of lost in a daze. I went places and done things. People tell me about it, but I don't even remember all of it. Because it just kind of just happened. And of course, we did all we could to find out all we could about it. See if we could find out something. My cousin come over. We talked to several different people to find out what took place, but it just so much of a shock and everything to us.
When it was announced that people that had been arrested for your daughter's murder, how did you react to that news when you found out that there were people in custody that were charged with her homicide?
Now, what you got to understand is that Mayfield Police Department had this case for 3 years and didn't come up with nothing. And I talked to the mayor, tried to get him to let the FBI take it over, but he wouldn't. But they let the state police take it over. And then they had it 3 years and nothing took place. They kept saying they were working on it, but they didn't come up with anything. And nothing take place until the KBI come in. And that was because I was talking to Greg Stumbo, the Attorney General. But I had also talked to the Attorney General before him. And after the case was messed up, 3 other Attorney Generals after him. The case wasn't just sitting. I was working on things. I called everybody. I called Jesse Jackson. I called the Southern Poverty Law Center. I called Al Sharpton. I called everybody I could get a hold to. I called Dr. Lee. And I called Dr. I can't remember his name now. He was doing the forensic files on TV. I called everybody I could get a hold to. I called what was his name? John Walsh, that was doing that TV program. I called everybody I could think of to help with the case. Because the prosecutor was acting like he really didn't care when he had it. And there were stories coming up about Jeremy Adams. He was going around town telling people that he done it, but they wouldn't arrest him. There were stories coming up about Ronnie Lear, but the prosecutor kept telling me that he was a nice guy. He wouldn't do nothing like that. And that Jeremy Adams was just bragging. He ain't done nothing like that. And I couldn't get him to do anything. That's why I had started trying to get someone else on the case. Now, when Arthur Burton was the mayor, he told me that more likely we'd never find out who killed my daughter. Of course, I wouldn't accept that. And then when Mayor Potts got in office, that's when something got done and the state police got on it.
Once Jeremy Adams and Lolo Saxton were charged and later released, and once Quincy Cross and Jeffrey Burton were arrested, how did you react to that? Did you think that there might be some charges that would stick and your family would finally get justice?
Well, I mean, you are always glad to hear something took place. But I had already been looking into the case myself by then. And I really couldn't see how what they were saying took place. I mean, the evidence that we were going over, it didn't lead to the people that they had.
Did you have any contact with either Quincy or Jeffrey during, before, or after their trials?
Yeah, I had contact with them. The contact that I had with them, it was like me and my cousin, we talked to Vinisha Stubblefield, and we had talked to Lolo right after it happened, or real close to right after it happened, just to kind of find out, what we could find out from them. We didn't get much out of them, but Vinisha had a bracelet on her arm that was around Jesse's leg. Because when my cousin, we asked him, because I told him, and my cousin asked her about it, and she said, "No, Jessica, give that to her." And my cousin said right off, he thinks she was lying. And I think she was too. I don't think Jesse would give her that. She had some bracelets on her arm that said, and on her leg that said, "What would Jesus do?" And we just didn't feel like Lolo told us the truth about anything. course, he's a smooth operator. He's a smooth talker. So, but we didn't think what he was saying was the truth. And so we talked to some more people that told us that they thought the police was involved and why they thought the police was involved, stuff like that. We did all that we could do, but I was trying to stay out of it because I worked for the city of Mayfield, and the city of Mayfield police was investigating. So they put Ronnie Lear recused himself from the case, so they put Tim Faulkner and Natividad, both newcomers, in investigating and being investigators. As a matter of fact, Tim Faulkner was made an investigator the day it happened. And he kept telling me he had no clue what he was doing. He had no clue. He didn't know how to do it. He didn't know what he was doing. But he felt like every time he went to talk to someone, somebody had been there before him and talked to him. And there was a lot of people around the middle school and other people that we had talked to that had something that knew information about the case that they never talked to.
Did they give any reasons as to why? Were they afraid that there would be some type of like retribution from law enforcement or?
Yes, that's what they told us. I mean, most people felt like the police was involved and that they better not say nothing because, they might get in trouble about that.
Did you or your family ever experience any type of like harassment or having to be silenced by law enforcement or anybody, like threats?
Yes. All of my kids had some run-ins with the police after that, just small stuff, them following them, pulling them over, asking them stuff. My daughter had said that police would pull her over every time she went to town, driving my car. So one night I had to drive it to town about 10 o'clock, and they came over and pulled up beside me. I didn't believe it, but it was true.
What kind of things would they say to you?
They didn't stop me much. Because I had been working previously with the sheriff's department and at the fire department. So they didn't say much to me.
When it comes to Quincy Cross and Jeffrey Burton, do you believe they are indeed guilty or do you believe they are innocent?
Well, from the beginning, I felt like the police was involved. I felt like the police, for either because they messed around with a young girl or because these guys were selling drugs for them through Nikki Brown. They had, I guess the police was protecting them because the information that was missing, the stuff that happened, the police had to do it.
Do you have a theory on who might be responsible specifically and why this crime occurred in the first place?
Well, I think it had something to do with the country club and these and I think the police had something to do with it and the prosecutors. That's just the only way you can hide this is that the police, the prosecutors, the judge, and everybody work together. Otherwise, it wouldn't work.
Before we wrap our conversation up, is there anything that anybody would like to add that we might not have covered yet?
Yeah, there's something I would like to add. After doing my investigation, I have retained the documents from a conversation that Vinisha Stubblefield and Victoria Caldwell were having. They were texting each other on their computers. I went to Vinisha and asked her about a particular person. She told me she didn't know that person. So I go to her, I said, well, let's go to your house and get on your computer and let's see. So we went to her house and got on her computer. Well, the person she said that she didn't know was the person that was on her computer. And she said, well, he was trying to talk to me. I didn't know that's who he was talking about. But later on, I also got copy of a conversation that Vinisha and Victoria had. And Vinisha had contacted Victoria and told her that the case had been reopened and that Joe and Jean now knew that the people who went to jail for Jessica's murder didn't do it. Well, the response to that was from Victoria Caldwell. She said, yeah. She said, I know they didn't do it. I know that. That's true. She said, but I wish they would leave it alone because I don't want to live through it all over again because now I have daughters. Well, now, I have that written statement that they gave. And it plainly states in this conversation that they had that Vinisha Stubblefield and Victoria Caldwell knew from the beginning. And Quincy Cross, Tamara Caldwell, and Jeffrey Burton did not kill that girl because they stated it in the statement that they gave that Jean and Joe now knows that the people who went to jail for Jessica's murder didn't do it. The response from Victoria was, that's true, but I don't want to live through it again. I wish they would leave it alone. Now, if that's not a confession, I don't know what to tell you.
The other thing you'd asked earlier about if I had talked to any of them, for a couple, I was on the city council, and then we needed somebody to run planning and code enforcement. So I was the director of that for over 2 years up there. And when the word kind of went out that this was going to come back up, like Noble was saying, both Vinisha and Jeremy kept hanging around City Hall up there in my office. And so I talked to Vinisha several times, and she always said that the KBI made all the stuff up and that Susan Galbert had made up the story. I was going to say developed it, whatever. And so she did say that. But when you tell any authorities that, like when I've even talked to the current sheriff here and the different ones, and they'll say, well, how do you know that's true? They've lied so many times. If they're telling the truth now, how would you know? And Jeremy, I actually gave him a ride out to near Fancy Farm to some place he was living with some people out there. And I thought I'd get something out of him. And he said he was going to tell me who, heard this before, who did it, and he would work with me and all these things. And he never followed through or anything. So they get stirred up whenever they think something's going to happen, and they're trying to protect themselves. And I think that's the same way with the Attorney General's office. Even if they change Attorney Generals, Barbara Whaley's still in there, and she's one of the big cheeses. And what's his name? The other one, not Robert O'Neill. Lee Wise's wife, as far as I know, she moves from the Attorney General's to the Criminal Justice Cabinet. So there's some high pressure people in Frankfurt that can keep this thing derailed. So I mean, it just goes on and on. And Mr. Currin has been really nice to us, and he's been over here, and we've tried to work on this to get to the truth. And he said many times, and I think it's what we all should work for, he wanted people to be held accountable, but he didn't want to just throw anybody in there just to close the case. And that's really, in a nutshell, is what they've done. It really is. They didn't even corroborate anything, stuff that they teach you in basic training for investigation. It's just like originally Quincy was charged with threatening because he supposedly had a meeting where he had a gun, and he threatened these folks to get them to go along with his story. Well, that was the state. They filed charges on him for that and everything. Nobody ever checked that out. So the jailer in Christian County, or deputy jailer, testified at Quincy's trial that he was in custody there. There's no way he could have had that meeting and threatened those people. He was in jail. And so how do you go and file charges? Now, I've been on the grand jury here for a year. I can't believe they would have me, but I was. They indict almost anybody that goes in there. I mean, it's just a really a kangaroo system. I mean, you could rank. They always got that joke. What is it? You could indict a grilled cheese sandwich. Even attorneys say that. You don't have the oversight here that you do like where I work. That would go to a district attorney. If in this mess, we'd had a big meeting in there, all this would have been gone over. Everything would have to be corroborated, all these things. They didn't do that. And they haven't done it in other cases. Look at the Murray State arson case. They did that. And that's just, and they get away with it because nobody wants to hold them accountable, especially the Kentucky State Police. They're supposedly above everybody. And apparently they got some power. They got rid of the KBI because they didn't want them around, and they're gone.
You don't have anyone that can go to court and say, hey, this person is telling the truth. We know that they're telling the truth. That what they say, we can corroborate and know that it's the truth. They don't have that. They don't have the evidence. You don't have no evidence from Tamara Caldwell. You don't have any from Quincy Cross. You don't have any from Jeffrey Burton. They even put them at the crime scene, let alone indicting them and convicting them. You at least have to have, 96% of evidence to be able to come up even with an indictment. You know, they don't even have 10%. But they railroaded these kids into jail for personal greed. And that's what happened, to cover up the wrongdoings that they were doing on the city level and then on the state level.
So we gave you a whole bunch, and I know you'll have to sort it out. It's kind of a shame you haven't seen the record, because it does make a lot more sense when you see how, if you corroborated this stuff, they're saying one thing this time, they're saying something this time, and according to the prosecution, that doesn't make any difference. The story they're telling at the court is the truth. Even though they said all these other things, it couldn't possibly be true if this. In the crime scene doesn't match the evidence that the state has produced. And all their evidence, there's no DNA, all these things we've said, all it is these witness statements. Rosie Christ, I have an affidavit from her. I went up to California. I was working out there. She gave me an affidavit, and it was notarized that the police made her say all that, made it up. And then she finally tells the truth at the trial, when she's called by the defense that she was lying. And then they turn around and prosecute her for perjury. Well, so they, it's like Noble was saying, they got the power over you because they're going to get her one way or the other, and she's on assistance, and they can always use that to threaten people or take your kids away or any of that.
Yeah.
And how they investigated this, if you look, I don't know if you've seen any of the record, when they're putting this case together, it was always a bat that was the thing that was used. Well, they go out and dig up Rosie Christ's next to her trailer, which was a dumping ground for construction debris and other. Well, they can't find a bat, any of that. They set aside a ratchet that goes click, click. Well, then magically, that's the weapon. It changes from a bat to a ratchet, and a ratchet doesn't click, click unless you're turning it on something. So whatever didn't make sense, they made up something to make it work for them. And as long as you could get a jury of 12 people to buy it, you're home free.
And also, you saying that, when you check, when they went out there and found this ratchet or this bat or whatever, when they said they went out there and hid this bat that was allegedly used in the crime. Well, when you check with the Water Public Works, Rosa didn't even live there during that time. So therefore, you couldn't say that you took it to her house and her property because she didn't even live there.
The ratchet was just set aside till the KBI gets it changed, and then magically that's the weapon. The last thing I'll say, because I know we'll take a lot of time, Vince Eustace and Joe was in that court. Vince Eustace was sick, and he shouldn't have been allowed to continue. And it's in the court record that the judge asked him in open court, Vince, do you think you can go on? And he said yes. Vince puts his head down over there, looked like he was sleeping at the defense table, and the judge never corrected any of that.
You look at the investigator from the Kentucky Innocence Project, he investigated the case. Mr. Poole himself, he investigated the case. I came along 10 years after the case. I investigated the case. And three different investigators, 3 separate times, we all come to the same conclusion. There's no way in the world that Tamara Caldwell, Jeffrey Burton, and Quincy Cross committed this crime. There's just no way they did it. There is no evidence. There's no weapon. There's no witness. They did not prove who killed Jessica Currin. And the people that they accused of killing them, the people that they sent to jail for killing that girl, they didn't do it. And the evidence shows it.
That was part 2 of my interview with John Poole, Noble Faulkner, and Joe Currin. Leave a comment on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and let me know what your thoughts are in this case. Do you believe Quincy is innocent, guilty? Head on over to Patreon, subscribe as little as $3 a month, patreon.com/unforbiddentruth. You can get access to additional interviews, access to a virtual true crime artifact gallery, a monthly inmate procured artifact package, and much more. Thank you for listening.
Unforbidden.